So anyway, welcome to Metacognitive Cafe. This is about developing student metacognition in online discussions. And my name is Judith Littlejohn. I'm here in Batavia at Genesee Community College. So currently I'm an instructional designer here at the college, and I've been in online learning for 13 years now, and I teach history online as an adjunct. So my interest in helping students develop their metacognition came more from my adjunct work and what I was seeing happening in my courses. And now I can carry it over into the courses that I work on as an ID. And John and I have had a lot of conversations about this, so he was interested in it too. And so my interest, I was always interested in critical thinking. Teaching history online, I teach history gen eds, and the gen eds I teach have to incorporate the critical thinking institutional learning outcome. So that's always been on my radar to make sure that somehow I know the students are getting some critical thinking skills. And so there's a campus-wide interest in that here. So in January of 2014, we had an all-day workshop with Rush Cosgrove from the Foundation for Critical Thinking. And he gave us a lot of great ideas, and we worked on the elements of thought, as you can see displayed here. And so from that, I came up with, I built in a lot of discussions right then on critical thinking and overtly nurturing critical thinking skills in the class. And we'll see that in a second. Then a couple years later, we had John Drager come in from Buff State. He's the Director of Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and he also runs this Improve with Metacognition blog. And he had some really great ideas based off of this work by Kimberly Tanner and how she was working metacognition and critical thinking into all her courses. So if we can go to the next one, we'll see that a little bit. Well, so this was the initial type of discussion that I did with after we saw Rush Cosgrove. You can see that we were looking, the discussions would build on each other as far as the critical thinking skills go. So they're course content discussions where the students are really looking for the purpose, question, information, concepts, assumptions, and inference. And it worked out pretty well because the students would have to really, dig into the pages that they were directed to. Often it was primary sources. Sometimes it was, a secondary author's opinion. But they'd have to find this information and really try to evaluate what was going on with the source. And they liked it. They liked feeling like they were starting to get an understanding of critical thinking and trying to analyze what they're reading a little bit better. But it did kind of restrict what our class discussions were about. So this would be an example of a graded class discussion. Then if we can go on to the next slide. Excuse me. This is what John Drager was basing his work off of from Kimberly Tanner. And so they had set up, here she set up a table where they talked about what they were going to work on and how they were going to monitor and evaluate this. And so if we look at what they're focusing on here, questions, and if you could keep hitting the space bar, strategies, keep going, how much, the time they're spending, what's their motivators, or what motivates them, what's working for them, and their objectives. And I think that, and their goals. I think this was great. I love this idea that students were talking about these things in their course. And of course, John Drager teaches grad students and he teaches face-to-face. And so here I'm at a community college with, first-time students, and they're all online. So the problem was that, that I could see, was that Drager's strategy presupposed that the students read the material. And in the community college, the challenge is getting them to read the material, getting them to buy the book, first of all, but also getting them to sit down and focus and thoughtfully read the material. So I wanted to come up with a way that they could start to think about how they learn and incorporate their critical thinking skills, but also kind of force them to really read this stuff and then think about it. So, and then John was intrigued by this also from a different perspective. So why don't you move on and talk a little bit about yours, John?
I had already been using a lot of quizzing in my online class, so they had to read. But they often settled for really superficial understandings when I gave them problem sets and problems to work on. They weren't really engaging with the material at the level I hoped them to do so. So they often settled for a superficial understanding, and generally they tended to submit everything in 2 or 3 hours before assignments were due and so forth. And even when I forced them to space it out a little bit, they still tended to do it at the bare minimum spacing that was mandated. So what we both did is we tried introducing a weekly low-stakes discussion. And Judy, I'll pass it back.
So back to that table that Kimberly Tanner had developed, I kind of used that as the guideline for the metacognitive prompts and applied that to the course content. And hit it again, John. So there are assigned readings and videos. And so together we called all this the Metacognitive Cafe. So this is an example of what this looked like for my students. So History 101, this is Ancient World. And again, these are a lot of first-time college students. These courses have no prereqs, no writing skills, no reading skills required. You know, the assumption is that they're reading and writing at a college level. So this is an example of how I just embedded this right into the course. You can see that the requirements for the week are laid out. Hit it again. And so in each week there's this bottom line that says participate in Metacognitive Cafe number, X. And I would tell them to kind of spend a half hour on that throughout the course of the week. And so this is an example. We use Blackboard also, and this is what the questions would look like in Blackboard. If you'd hit it again, this shows you these paragraphs here were in every single question just to reinforce what the purpose is here, what metacognition is, and why we're doing it. And you can see that these discussions are only worth 5 points each. And it's a course, I think the course is about out of 800 or 900 points, so they're pretty low stakes. But I don't know about you, but I see the students don't, they kind of treat everything like it's all the same value. That's what I see anyway. So they did kind of focus on these as much as they did their other work, which I liked. But
I had the same experience. That mine were 5% of their grade, and they put at least as much effort into this as they did in other assignments that were 15 or 20% and 25%.
Yeah, it's funny. But I like the result from it. Then you can, so I always have that static couple of paragraphs, and then you can see the arrow pointing at what is the actual question. And this example I like here because it's, what is your topic for your research paper? And I find that in these online asynchronous courses, the students never meet each other, and the research paper it's a huge amount of their time, and it's a lot of independent work. And I find that there's no good way really to celebrate their accomplishment or what they're finding out online. So I try to fit that into the Metacognitive Cafe and start these research paper discussions so that they can share them with each other and start to talk about what it is they're finding on their own.
And it also prompts them a little bit to think about helpful scholarly sources rather than things they copied and pasted from Wikipedia. So it's just a nice priming going on.
So this then is what it looks like when the student posts their response. So this person, just put their thesis statement there and stated that he or she is finding helpful scholarly resources through the use of GCC's library databases, which is awesome. That's exactly what I want to see him doing. And this particular statement prompted a lot of discussion within the course of students who were just amazed that, oh my gosh, I can do that too. I can go to the library. I can use the library databases. They can access it online. It's all embedded in the course, but it seems to be a new discovery every time. So, but I liked the conversation that this kind of thing started. But also, if you click one more time, you can see the overall rating. I do use, so in these Metacognitive Cafe discussions, I don't participate in them a whole lot, but because I don't want to hamper their discussion, especially if it's their opinion and, you know, how they're living their lives day to day, how they're fitting their coursework in. But I do want them to know that I'm reading, I'm attentive, and that they're on the right track. So I give them the 5-star ratings just to kind of keep them going and let them know that they're on the right path here. So I like that. And so that was, then here's another example. So I asked them about their workspace. Does your workspace make it easier to read and work on online courses? What does your workspace look like? Because students they're in some sort of denial about how the environment can affect how well they're learning. And I like to just kind of raise awareness, like, where are you working? Where are you doing this? What you know, and kind of get into a bigger conversation of how do you set time aside, and how do you control what distractions you have? How are you focusing? But so I start off with this, and then just have them post pictures of where they're doing their work. And here's one. This first student works right in the library. That's one of the library study carrels. This student at home, you know, she has all her, and I think both of these two students both said they have to clear everything off of their desk except for exactly what they're working on. You can see the student on the left enjoys having the window to look out while he or she is working. And then the next one, I love this one. The student writes all the work that's due on their ceiling just to kind of keep themselves on track. But by sharing this kind of thing, they're kind of, you know, they're sharing themselves. You know, this is pretty personal. Most of these are in their bedroom. This last one is the headboard. You can just kind of start to make off on the left there, or make it out there. And so it's really kind of building the sense of community. They're starting to feel like they know each other. And it's really building tighter bonds in the classroom, I think. And, you know, and of course it also gets them to think about the space, and they see what other students do. And then they start to find that they might have common problems or common struggles, and then they can kind of work together to iron these things out. And this is one discussion that I do participate in, because I always post a picture of what my workspace is at home, so that they kind of feel like they know me a little bit too. But and then what's next, John? I'm drawing a blank here. Oh, so yeah, these are just samples, you know, what the discussion questions are like for this particular course. So what I try to do here is back to that initial concern where the students aren't reading. You can see in Metacognitive Cafe #1, we're talking about what do they know about the agricultural revolution. And then I say, what is the most interesting thing you read about it? So they have to engage with the reading materials at least enough to find an interesting fact out about the agricultural revolution. And I try to keep building on that. Like in the second one, I asked them, you know, the most interesting part again, and then do you prefer the textbook authors' descriptions of events or the primary sources? So they have to start comparing the textbook authors to the primary sources, and really start to engage with the materials. And so I try to, throughout the term, kind of branch off to, you know, like their home study space, their own motivation, and then keep bringing it back to the content and get them back into the reading materials, and make sure that we don't lose sight of what our main goal is here. And the next couple slides are just pictures, images from the different types of questions. So you can see, you know, there's the workspace one, number 6. 5, we compare the textbook and quizzes from the videos that support it to just try to find out what's more useful, so they can start to weigh the value of the resources. And 7 is the motivation. And number 8 is always interesting. I just ask them, why is it important to read the chapter before doing the assignments or taking the quiz? And when I first put this one in, I thought it was kind of really simplistic, and that, you know, they kind of scoff at a silly question, but it really, this one really spurs a lot of conversation about, most of the students will admit that they try to take the quiz or do their course student learning outcome assessment without reading the content first, and then, you know, they'll say, oh, it took me so long, and then I had to go back and read it again. So it's almost like an epiphany. They'll start to say, wow, it's so much easier if I read first and then take the quiz, or then try to write my paper. And it's funny to watch them discover this for themselves online and then share it with each other.
And they pay a lot more attention when it's coming from a peer, because we always tell them to read the material first. But they listen more when it's from each other. And one of the points Judy made before was something that really struck me too, that they got to know each other a whole lot better. They started to make connections to their lives. Because it's an online class, I've got some older people in there, some younger people with very different backgrounds in different areas. And they got to know each other a lot more, and that bled over into the content discussion quite a bit too, because they make reference to, this might apply very differently to you, and they've mentioned the person's name, given that you've been working in this field for 20 years or something similar. But it gave, as Judy said, a much better sense of community than I've ever seen in an online class before.
So again, with number 9, we're talking about transferring the skills that we're developing in this course into their other courses, and again, sharing their research. And then I go back into the quizzes and the course student learning outcomes, and how are things working together, how do they fit, and just talking about their mastery learning. And what's next? Oh, then back to the content. So now we're in chapter 11, so we're getting toward winding it down here, but having them compare specific things from the textbook just to make sure they haven't lost sight of that. And then 13 again is a little bit more of the transference and how this will help with their other academic goals. And number 14, I just always want feedback on the course. And a lot of them say, so it's a toss-up. I do mastery quizzing in the courses, and for number 14, it's kind of half and half. Half of them really like these discussions the most, and then the other half like the mastery quizzes the most. And this is an example of some of the feedback. So there's number 1. I had attempted to do the work without reading the chapter, but I wasn't successful. I ended up having to go back to the book and reading to complete the assignment. So I liked, it's the kind of thing that they're sharing. They're very honest. And this is an overview of kind of how we build in more supports into the course, the types of work they have to do throughout the chapter, and then trying to weave in more supplemental resources to help with their learning skills and their critical thinking both. So you can see if you hit it again, so there's a combination of mastery quizzes, the critical thinking. We do peer reviews and research and work on their time management skills. But if you click one more time, John, so talk about thinking, interleaving practice. I always encourage them to try the Pomodoro method and make sure they get enough sleep. And so kind of like a holistic view of this course and how it can help their learning overall, and then push these skills out into their other courses for academic success.
Okay, and these are mine. I always have a similar lead-in as Judy had, describing it just to remind them what it was for and so forth. The first one was right when the course opened, asking if they've ever taken an online class before, what strategies work well and so forth, and asking them about any concerns. And it was kind of an icebreaker type activity. They began getting to know each other a little bit, and they talked about what worked. I started to see some discussions of them being visual learners and all sorts of other things that we'll come back to, because it got progressively more and more annoying for me, and then I had to deal with it a little bit later. But then the next thing after this course is very front-loaded with some of the most difficult graphs and math early on in the first 2 or 3 weeks. And I knew they'd be struggling, so I asked them to discuss dealing with challenging material. And what they tended to say was it was really hard understanding the graphs, and they talked about strategies. They talked about working together. They talked about watching. I have a group of YouTube videos. I have some videos I created, and there's also other resources online that they can use to refer to. And they started evaluating that and talking about what worked for them, and sharing techniques in terms of time management and other things. The next thing I asked about distractions, which was similar to what Judy asked about the space, but I went directly to the distraction issue. And I had them do a little bit of reading on the importance of focus, attention, and spacing, and interleaving, and so forth. And again, it was a really productive discussion. I asked them a little bit to reflect back after we were about nearly a third of the way into it, asking them more about the difficulties. And I was monitoring these pretty actively. And this was a course that I completely rebuilt last spring, and I was rebuilding it week by week. So I was also partly using this to get some feedback about what was working well, what wasn't working well, what sort of gaps they were having. And I was responding to that a little bit as it went through. So it was also part of the process of getting continual feedback. Now, we were talking about some more controversial topics a little bit, unemployment, welfare, earned income tax credits, minimum wages, and so forth, which was, certainly have been in the news a lot. I know a lot of the students who are business majors and other students are not, and there were some fairly active exchanges there where people had very different views, but I had them reflect on how their views had evolved based on the evidence they had seen and the studies they had seen. And there were some really good discussions about how they went into it with very rigid opinions one way or another. Most of them said that, they've moderated their opinions. They've seen that there's more than one side to the issues, regardless of, with one or two exceptions who were very locked in from the beginning and left that way. And then, because they still kept mentioning learning styles, I had them talk a little bit about that, and I sent them to a reading. I truncated that. I showed them a TED talk on research on learning styles, which shows that it really isn't a very meaningful concept and so forth. And this was probably one of the most troubling discussions for many of the students. About a third of them were really amazed at something that they had heard about their whole life, had no empirical basis. About a third of them just didn't believe it because they think, well, these are just studies. What do these studies? Mostly Trump supporters. But these were studies that they just didn't accept. Clearly, it was a problem with the study design because they knew that this worked for them. They were clearly visual learners and nothing was going to change. And the other third were skeptical, but thought about it a little bit and were willing to consider that, maybe they're not visual learners. Maybe, maybe they could learn in more than one way, that they didn't need to constrain themselves in the way that they had perhaps been conditioned to believe. I asked them a little bit about how this might transfer to their careers. It's a course in labor economics. They're going to be working. So I wanted them to reflect a little bit on, especially because, again, this was a fairly difficult portion of the class, on how these things that they were learning might be useful in what they're going to do later, which I hope would also help deepen their understanding by giving them a little more intrinsic motivation. The next topic was on education. And here we talk about things like the human capital model and the signaling model, which have very different explanations of why we go to school. One is that education makes you more productive and you earn more because you're more productive. The other suggests that education is a way of sorting people out according to productivity. And that was, again, a concept that was really challenging to them on either side of the issue. And students, there was a separate content discussion on this. But here, I asked them to look at the present value models and the lifetime maximization of present value and other models that are used in both the human capital and signaling models, and think about what this really meant to them. How did this theory connect to the decision-making process they made? And there were some good discussions where many of them were just saying, didn't think about any of these things. Others were saying, well, we really did. That, we were thinking about the fact that we might get paid more in the future by doing this. And if we didn't see that possibility, we might have been less likely to go. And it was a really productive discussion there, especially for those people who had left, had worked for a while and come back to school, having a very different perspective than those who were just going through the traditional route. Then after that, we talked a little bit about income inequality and how educational choices would affect that. And I had them reflect here a little bit on how their backgrounds, where they grew up, where they were born, their level of privilege and so forth, might affect their choices. and what might have happened if their choices, if they happened to have been born in a different place with a different type of schooling, a different quality of school. And, you know, I noticed there were still a lot of issues with students turning in things at the very last minute. So I figured a metacognitive cafe discussion on procrastination might help a little bit. And actually, this was one they referred back to a lot, saying that the strategies that other people shared was helpful and that they tried adopting some of those and plan to adopt some of them in the future. The next topic we were talking about, I tried to tie these as much as possible, as Judy did too, to the readings that week. Or the next topic for the 11th module of the course was on discrimination. So I had them go to the Project Implicit website at Harvard and work through one or more of the tests and then discuss that. And many of them were very surprised by it because, of course, they all believed they were free of bias, or particularly the white students believed they were free. White males in particular believed they were free of bias, but they found some bias that they hadn't anticipated. One of the more striking conversations, and one of the things that shocked the students the most, were the female students who found that they were biased towards associating being female with home and males with work and careers. And that was something the female students just didn't expect at all. And it led to a really good discussion about how this may affect hiring, promotion, political viewpoints, social interactions, and so forth. Then we were getting towards the end of the semester, so I had them talk a little bit about sleep, cleaning strategy. Apparently that was probably a learning strategy typo. I've got to correct that. But basically, you know, it talked about the importance of sleep and having space and retrieval practice rather than cramming at the end. And again, they reflected on this quite a bit and talked about how that's not really what they were doing, that they really do cram a lot, and some of them had heard that these things were important, but they weren't really convinced until some of them claim it at least to have been convinced by the research that were summarized in that article. Now again, I had them talk a little bit about the next topic was on pay systems in terms of how different types of pay structures, hourly rates, piece rates, salaries, and so forth, affects incentives, but there was also a nice discussion of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation in some of the research there. And it talked a little bit about how this might work with classes, whether they were intrinsically or extrinsically motivated and what affected that, and how the grading system might connect to that, and how that, you know, to make some connections between pay and grades and classes. And the last one was kind of a reflection, very much like Judy had at the end asking them to evaluate it. So I explained why I had done this and asked them if it worked this way. And basically, you know, I talked a little bit about research on teaching and learning, as well as what Judy had found in her class. In particular, what most of them ended up commenting on was the fact that they really enjoyed the sense of community, that they had never felt quite as connected to their fellow students in online or face-to-face classes. Just a couple of responses in there. Oh, actually, this is Judy's, some student feedback. Judy?
Yeah, so I do give them, I use the survey tool in Blackboard and ask my own specific survey questions in addition to the regular campus course evaluations at the end of the term. And I just wanted to see how the students felt about the metacognitive cafe discussions and if they worked or if they helped them academically. And overwhelmingly, I think they found some value in it. So I think it turned out pretty well. What was the next one there, John? Oh, then this is just some samples of their feedback. So they said it was a great way to extract information and absorb the input of other students, and it's fun to see the different output each person has, even though the material was all the same. And the middle one, the discussion sometimes did not mean much to the coursework, although it did help me learn how to learn the material better. So that, to me, was the point of it. So I loved that response. But the bottom person said, I enjoy how course discussions allow you to branch off and have open dialogue. So you can see they were all finding different types of value in the discussions. I think they were very helpful.
And here's just a sample of some of the comments I got. I learned new ways to study and other helpful tips on getting through the semester. Something that might not have happened if we didn't have those discussions. Or Next person said they thought it was a great addition and should be incorporated in every online class, which was a much more positive comment than I expected. Next one, it made them feel more comfortable because they realized they weren't the only person struggling with some of the material. And I think that helped quite a bit. Normally in a class like this, I start with about 40 students and I end up with somewhere around 32 completing it. I only had one student drop, and that student dropped in the first couple of weeks, so it seemed to help. It's a small sample, I'm not sure if it's statistically significant, but it just generally did better, and they seemed much more comfortable. And the last one was that it helped them find new strategies to learn and retain information, and learn some new skills that might be useful after graduation in the workplace. So, Judy?
So the benefits that I could see here is I do believe that it helps the students or gives the students maybe the little bit of motivation they still needed to read more. And, you know, as John and I have both been saying all along, it really does help build a community in the classroom, in the online classroom. And just in general raises their awareness of how they are learning, what's working for them, and what other strategies they can try. And we're hoping that they develop good habits, let's say, good learning habits to carry with them.
Of all the students in my class, I think there were 39, only one student reviewed it as not being very helpful, and he said because he didn't really learn anything from it. But it's also the student who persistently was very insistent that all the studies of the effect of immigration on earnings were wrong. All the studies of immigration and crime were wrong. We had a chapter on that. All the research on learning styles was wrong because he's a visual learner. And while that may be what they found in the studies, that's not what was true for him because he's different. And so he was just kind of opposed to everything. He didn't do terribly badly in the course, but he was not very open to new viewpoints in general. But the others were universally positive and really seemed to enjoy it.
Nice.
Any questions or comments?
I was just going to say it strikes me as teaching the F section, the freshman only section, where students are supposed to learn skills, you know, college thinking skills and how to succeed in college, and metacognition, you know, we talk about that, and I think I might incorporate that. It's not a face-to-face class, but it would be helpful to incorporate these kind of discussions, and online could be
just the sharing about what practices work, what are effective, what's not. I think I'd love to see this incorporated more, especially with freshmen. Judy gets them early. You know, a few of the students in my class said they wish they had seen some of this stuff earlier because now they're a junior or senior, and it would have been really helpful for them if they saw it as freshmen or sophomores, because they said all the research stuff, the TED Talks and the other documents on research on learning was brand new to nearly all of them, and it was so different than what they've always heard.
This is an addition to regular discussions you might.
Yes, so I had 2 discussion forums. The content one was 15% of the grade. This was 5% of the grade. So this was just a side one, and they kind of liked the lower pressure, that they could just talk about it. If something was really difficult, they could talk about that here, and it was sort of a relief valve in some ways. They got to take some of the pressure up by sharing about what they were doing to try to get through it. They said they had to read through it a few times, and then they went over and worked on some problems. They watched some other videos about it. They watched a crash course video that was related to it, or something similar. Or they watched the videos I had put together, because I tried to do more of them on the things that were most difficult for them.
Yeah, I also found students revealing a lot about their day-to-day lives and how they're fitting their online courses in with their lives. I had one student last semester she was a school bus driver, and it was fascinating. I think it was when we were talking about where your workspace is, where you're doing your homework, and she would get up in the morning and get her own kids ready to school, get them wherever it is they wait for their bus, and go out and do her bus run, pick up these students, and just then she'd have 2 hours. She'd be in a parking lot and she'd study, and then she'd have to go pick up these other students, take them home, get her own kids, bring them home, do the dinner, get them ready for bed, and then after all that was done, this woman would drive down. We're in a super rural area here, and we're in the GLOW region, so it's Genesee, Livingston, Orleans, and Wyoming counties. And so she was out in very rural Wyoming County, and she would drive down a road where she knew the people at the end of the road had Wi-Fi, open Wi-Fi, and she would park there because she didn't have Wi-Fi, and then she'd do her homework in her car and at night. It was crazy. And then and I just think a lot of that kind of those kinds of struggles you just don't reveal in a regular course content discussion. And now everyone's, trying to support her and help her, and she's able to just share that. I think just sharing that these are the struggles you have just helps a lot, just helps you manage them more, and that people are on your side. And it was just incredible, I thought, how much more we're finding out about the online student just through this type of a conversation.
I knew what jobs my students had early on, what they're currently doing, what they're planning to do. I learned about whether they have children, about what their parents did in some cases, because when they were talking about education and rural background, they talked about their parents' expectations, their teachers' expectations, and I found so much more about them than I've ever seen before in an online or face-to-face class, except maybe for one or two students who come in regularly. And they all did that. And again, as I said before, that bled over into the content discussion. And it made the content discussion much more productive because they were making connections to each other in there.
Yeah, I think that because it's so low stakes, they feel, they're able to have these conversations that aren't, their guard is down a little bit. It's more about themselves and what they're trying to do and what they want to know about the other people. And I think it does help their graded or content-driven discussions too, because they're more comfortable now talking to each other.
Okay, now they post in the discussion, and they have to read the other people's post, or do they not? I mean, how does it work exactly?
I have them, I set mine up so they're all post first. So you read the question, think about your answer, your response, and then you write your own response. Then once they post their response, they're able to view everybody else's. And for these, they have to respond to at least 2 other students. So they get, I give them 3 points for their initial post and then 1 point each for their responses to other students. But most of them go way beyond those 3 required posts. Or what I'm always striving for in my discussion boards is that back and forth kind of conversation where they'll comment and then ask a follow-up question, and the other poster will come back and answer that follow-up question. How do you set yours up, John? Is it similar?
The same way. In fact, when I was doing a discussion forum, when I had that class of when I was last using a discussion forum in a class of 400, it used to be really painful because I didn't do the post first. And what would happen is whoever posted, I broke the class up into 20 groups of 20 roughly. And what would happen is if the first person posted something really good, the other people would post really good elaborate discussions. If the first person in the group posted a really short thing, everyone else would do the same. And what would tend to happen is they'd all start to look really similar if they could see what the others had posted. So with the post first, they don't know what the others are posting. And as a result, it forces them to think a little bit more rather than just regurgitating what they've seen others doing. And my impression, at least, is, or my casual impression, is that they write 2 to 4 times more in the post first one than when I just let them see the others first.
Mm-hmm. I noticed back when I first started those critical thinking discussions after, with the Critical Thinking Institute people were here, they immediately, their discussion responses, I think I had calculated the average response went up like, I want to say 62 words per student. I can't remember the exact figure, but it seems once they have that like the focus on the critical thinking skill or the learning skill or whatever it is, they just really seem to expand on it more, and they felt it's almost like they feel a little bit more ownership over their response because it's a little more personalized, and they just wrote more. So I like to see that. It shows a little bit more reflection on their part.
Now, I did have in the first few weeks a few people to try to dodge the post first by accidentally submitting a blank submission.
Yeah.
But then if you don't give them any points for that because they submitted an initial post that was blank, they stop really quickly. And they get a comment saying, you know, unfortunately, you had nothing in your initial post, so you lost 60% of your grade.
Yeah, I've seen that a couple of times now, 3 different students over all the semesters that I've been trying these things, and one of them, I believe she said that it was an accident, and I think it really was because I could see the timestamps, and her second post was only about 45 seconds later, so clearly, like, I think she had typed up her response in a Word doc and then went and tried to copy and paste it and thought she had pasted it and didn't, and then immediately followed up. So I could tell she was pretty legit. But the other 2, I think, were doing that. They were just trying to get a look at the other responses. But this wasn't in the Metacognitive Cafe, though. That was in the other content-driven, you know, the learning outcome-driven discussions. And in those instances, I wrote to each student and said, you know, you can't do this again. And they stopped after I kind of called them out on it privately. So that was good because, yeah. Yep. I don't know. They think we're not going to notice. So I think we had a couple of the citations or references, or if you can go to the next slide.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
Oh, or just what we plan to do going forward. Keep trying it. I want to revise some of my questions. You know, I try to update my courses every semester, so think about that. And the Learning How to Learn MOOC. Do you want to talk about that, John? Or?
Yeah, if you haven't seen the Learning to Learn MOOC, it's an incredibly good MOOC that I wish all of our freshmen would see, or all of our students would see at some point, preferably before we get them. It's a 4-week MOOC. It's very straightforward. It's done by Barbara Oakley and this other guy whose name.
A longer name, yeah, I can't remember his name.
He does some more boring stuff on neuroscience and so forth, but she does the interesting analogies and applications, and she's a little more dynamic as a speaker. But David Parisian has used this here in one of his ed classes, where he tested students at the beginning of the term. He required them all to take the MOOC. Again, it's just 4 weeks, and I think it's about maybe 2 hours a week or so, roughly.
Yeah, well, it's not bad. It was just the one project that took a little more time than the rest of it, but it's not a very time-consuming endeavor.
And then he tested them at the end, and their scores went way up. It was all about common myths about learning, and they started to incorporate much of what they had learned about it. And it summarizes the research very effectively, and it gives people some really nice strategies to implement best practices in learning. So.
Mm-hmm. Then I think there are other resources.
About grading, you just said you graded with 3 points and 2 points, but earlier on the screen, did I see you actually had stars up there?
I put the stars up there, yeah. So that's a Blackboard rating. Well, it's an option in discussion boards in Blackboard. If you look through when you set up your discussion, you know, you put in your points in your rubric and there are all sorts of different things you can choose from as you go down the list. And right toward the bottom, there's an option that members can rate members' posts. And if you check that box, that's what enables those stars, the star ratings. And when you give someone stars as an instructor, they can see, the person who wrote the post can see that it was the instructor who did that. And then students, if they're particularly enamored of a post, they can rate each other's. But I find that they almost never rate each other's posts. It's extremely rare. But I go through and give them the 5 stars. I never give them less than 5. If I feel like they were way off base, I just ignore the stars and will type some sort of a response, or because I'm not going to weigh the value of their opinion. So they either are on track or they're not on track. So I pretty much always give them the 5 stars. And it's just a little bit of reinforcement so they know I'm paying attention, even if I don't jump right in there and say, hey, that was a great idea. Because sometimes I feel like once I hop in a discussion as the instructor, it kind of ends it there, you know, like that's the last word type of thing. So I really try to avoid that, but I want them to know that I'm there with them paying attention.
It gives them more sense of presence without dominating.
Yeah, exactly.
And these are the resources that Judy had referred to at the beginning.
Oh yeah, the URL to the Learning How to Learn MOOC is at the bottom there.
It's the most popular MOOC ever, partly because they offer it every month. So a new one starts. But
It was fun. I learned a lot of things. I liked some things kind of that I suspected, and now there was evidence to prove that I was right. Like every time I'm trying to struggle through something and make decisions and finalize a project or something, I just want to go to sleep. And I'm doing the right thing, I found out. Because when you're sleeping, you're kind of absorbing all your information and your brain is able to sort things out and build connections, and then often when you wake up, you'll just have a fresh start on the day, and as you do some rote activities like take a shower, brush your teeth, or go for a walk, then you get all these wonderful new ideas, and it's because you gave yourself that time to rest and assimilate your information. So I really enjoyed that MOOC. I highly recommend it.
it's very well done. It's a good example of best practice in the MOOC too. I did recommend it to all my students in the large class. I don't think any of them took me up on it, but I did encourage them to, because I was taking it. So this would be really useful if you guys took this. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Judy.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's nice. I like talking to you guys. And I wish you luck with the rest of your workshop series.
Thank you.
So my question is, how do you put this in your Blackboard course?
Just as another discussion forum. So, I have, each week I come up with 2 discussion topics, one on the content, which relates very directly to applications of the content, and the other where they're reflecting on it in some way, reflecting about what worked well or what didn't work well and trying to learn the material. And I just tell them they need to participate in each of these discussions with an original post and a couple of reply posts. I also require that they space them out at least 24 hours between their posts, because otherwise they all try to do it at the last minute, and it's hard to reply to somebody if no one has posted yet. So I think you do that similarly, don't you, in your content post?
I do. They have to have, to get the most value for their posts, they have to have spread their posts out for 3 or 4 days throughout the week. So they don't, I don't know, that's not quite enough to get them to really do that. I still find a lot of them cluster them at the end of the week, and that is frustrating.
I do, because I have the same issue, and they're losing a point or so every week. Just because they don't start it earlier. And many of them have recognized that and said this has been a problem for them and they need to get past it, but oh well.
Yeah.
So do you have different due dates for those different discussion posts, or you just?
I have all the final due date the same. I just look at the timestamps on it, so I have a rubric, that lists different things, and one is the spacing of posts. And I think you use the same. Right?
I do, yeah. That's the first one. In the rubric is how frequently they posted, or how many times they posted, and how far apart the posts were, how many times per week. I do know faculty here who will give them 2 different discussion grades, like one for they'll say your first post has to be in by Wednesday, and then your responses have to be done by Saturday, or however they set it up. But I'm just not willing to go to, I don't know. I don't want to have to grade it all twice.
It's easier
I don't
just.
know. It's tough. We almost need like a roundtable discussion on that and try to experiment with different ways to do it and how do we get them to they have that give and take back and forth throughout the week that we're striving for. That's the most frustrating part for me, I think.
I always had 2 students who posted in the metacognitive cafe within 5 minutes of it opening. They were waiting there for it. And I always had about maybe 20% of them who would wait until the very last possible minute, and many of them a little bit beyond that, to start it, so they lost points. There are probably 10 students out of 40 who nearly every week lost some points because they clustered them all on the last day or so. And I send out reminders. I say, send an email to the whole class saying, for a course announcement, many of you are losing points because of this. The rubric that's being used to evaluate your work was posted in Blackboard. It was attached to an email. Here's another copy of it as a reminder, and they still don't quite do it. And I don't know. We all procrastinate, but they procrastinate often more than we'd expect. Yeah.
Maybe that just gave me an idea. Maybe we could send, if you want that first post in, say by Tuesday or something, maybe Tuesday morning, just send them an announcement saying, don't forget, first post due tonight. I could try that kind of thing.
I thought about a few things. One is a Google Calendar for the course that could be shared with them. What I used to do in Angel, we don't have that capability now, but Angel had the ability to send emails only those who hadn't completed something. So 72 hours before a discussion was closing, I used to have it automatically send an email 2 or 3 in the morning, reminding them that they have not yet posted the discussion form, and it would repeat that each day until the due date. And that was all automated. Unfortunately, we don't have that capability, or as easily have that capability in Blackboard. But maybe, actually, you could have an automated course announcement.
My hesitation there would be flooding them with emails, because then they just start to ignore all of them. You always have to kind of balance how frequently you email them with, how important the message is, because they'll just start to tune it out. And then when you do have that super important thing, they're not going to read it.
Yeah. It's the same thing when I send out announcements about workshops. So I generally do about two a week. One when reminding them about things being due a day or 2 before, and then one when the grades are posted.
Yeah, I send out, the beginning of every week I send out my about this week message that we saw on the slide, that week 10 one, with the list of everything that they have to do, and then put the link to that unit right in the announcement, and then that way they can reply to the announcement if they have any questions or issues. But I could probably send a second one out during the week just to nudge them to go ahead and make that first post on time. I have to think about that for fall.
Okay. Any other? Okay. Then I will stop the recording.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. It was fun.